Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. It is March the 3rd, 2025, and this is a regular online meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. As most all of you know, I'm Dennis Baker, president of the club and host of tonight's meeting. Let me start out by once again telling you about this wonderful new website that the club has. It's a SmugMug website, and I want to thank Joe for the idea and Elaine Shook for doing all the legwork and putting it together. So hopefully by now you've checked out the site, and I'm sure, as I have been, you've been impressed. What I would urge you now is to upload some of your pictures to the many, many galleries that Elaine has created. And in the link or in the email tomorrow, the follow-up email for this meeting, I will include the necessary information, of course, a link to the website and more information about how to proceed with that upload. I want to thank Elaine also and Mark Corchado, who manages our traditional website that was created by a company called Visual Pursuits. And Mark has done some wonderful things on the website, like creating a direct link to the SmugMug website and another direct link to the club's YouTube page, where we have all of our videos from previous meetings. So thanks, guys. That's very much appreciated. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Jean Martin, who will talk to you about trips past and upcoming.
Hello, everyone. On the 25th of February, y'all went to the state library. Joe, did you want to say a couple words about that?
The we had 18 folks go to that particular venue, and it was really, really interesting.
What are you doing?
I mean, as we saw on the Facebook page, a lot of just absolutely fantastic photos. So that was a really good trip. Thank you.
Okay, and then this Saturday, the 8th, is the Gordonville mud sales, not mudslides. And Steve and Elaine will be the leaders for that. Just take note of the email that went out this week. I updated some travel information on that. I guess this year, for the first time, they're going to be busing people into the sales. So you'll need to look for the signs to park and to be bussed in. And then once you get there, the meet place will be the same as the map on the email. So just check that out, and you'll also be getting one on Friday with that updated information as well. And then on the 15th, we have Mary taking us to St. Patrick's Cathedral. Is Steve on?
Yes,
Yeah.
he is.
Steve, I'm sorry, can you say a word or two about the mud sales on Saturday?
Yes, we've been going there for 20 plus years, and you'll enjoy yourself. And if we meet at the location specified on the email, I can tell you some couple tricks of the trade, uh, how to take photos of the Amish buggies and whatnot. So you'll enjoy yourself. So uh, everybody's welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. And Mary is going to be leading us at the St. Patrick's Cathedral in Harrisburg on the 15th. Mary, do you want to say a couple words about that, please?
Sure. We've been there a few times, and it's beautiful. It's old. You feel like you're in Europe, I think anyway. And we'll be there from 9 to 11. And we have like full run of the church if we want it, pretty much. And believe it or not, there's a lot to take in once you get inside with the stained glass and the pews and the books and the altars and the statue. It's beautiful. So I think everyone will enjoy that.
Thank you, Mary. In April, we have two trips: Pine Grove to be out in the nature, and then on the 26th, we'll be going to Wildwood Lake. So those are some upcoming trips for us. The trips committee will be having a meeting in April, And if anyone has any venues or attractions that they think would make a good field trip, if you want to just shoot me a quick email about that, and I will take it to the rest of the committee. And Dennis, if you would please put my email address in tomorrow's notes.
I will do that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Gene. Our next online meeting will be in 2 weeks, March the 17th. Member Chris Scott has a special presentation for us. And Chris, could I call on you again to give a summary of what that meeting will be like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dennis. So next, or I guess not next week, March 17th, I'm going to be doing a demonstration or a presentation rather on Lightroom alternatives for those of you who are curious of what other photo editing applications are available. Again, it's not to convince anyone to walk away from Lightroom or Photoshop. It's really just to share what's available in the photo editing space. And I'll show you some of the unique things about each one of the software that's in the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Joe, who's going to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for this evening.
Thanks, Dennis. We're really fortunate to have Jay Cohen with us tonight. Jay is based up in Fairfield County in Connecticut, worked in New York City for many, many years. He's been a contributor and featured in Fine Eye magazine and Black and White Minimalist magazine and Shot magazine. He's also been a guest lecturer around the country to camera clubs and organizations. And he also does competition critiques and judging. So he's well-rounded in photography. When we met with Jay over the internet and got to see some of his work, it became very apparent to me that Jay's approach in my thought process is he photographs what he feels, not necessarily what he sees. And I think you're going to see that in his images tonight when he walks down the street in New York City and looks up and takes a snap of a building, and it looks to you and I just like a standard snapshot. But he will turn that into an exquisite piece of art. And that's what we will be seeing tonight from Jay's presentation. Jay, it's all yours, and your title slide is on the screen. We're going to ask everybody if you could mute yourself. And if you need to speak or want to ask a question, ask you to push on the space bar so then you can actually talk. This meeting will be recorded, is being recorded, so you can see it again and again. I think we'll want to do that when he gets into some of the processing so you can pick up some tips and tricks. Jay, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thanks for those kind words. It is such a pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm going to talk about architectural photography, what attracts me to it, my goals when I'm shooting architecture, some of my processes around it. I'll show you a ton of examples, and hopefully I will inspire you to get out there with your cameras and maybe look at the world a little bit differently and give a try at architectural photography. Let me first tell you a little bit about myself. I've been shooting seriously for about 15 years. When I say seriously, that's when I took the top dial on my camera from A to M, and I learned how to actually use my camera. And my kind of passion has only grown. So I focus, I guess, historically mostly on fine art, landscape. I do cityscapes, architecture. Lately, I've been spending more time on portraits and product photography. I recently moved to Connecticut. We built a house, and as part of the design of the house, I negotiated in with my wife a photo studio, which I'm sitting in now. So now I've got a studio with lights and backdrops, so I'm doing more things. But I must say, I'm always challenging myself photographically, getting myself in somewhat uncomfortable situations. In fact, tomorrow evening, I agreed to photograph a benefit, a charity benefit, 550 people. I don't do events. The biggest event I ever did was maybe 30. So I'm not charging them for it, but I also told them they might get what they pay for. So I'm nervous, I'm excited, I think I'll do a good job, but another example of me saying, let's try something different. I do photograph for some local magazines, which is fun. The gear that I use is, I'm a Nikon person. I use mostly my D850. My backup camera is the D750. And I basically, when I'm out, when I'm doing landscape or architectural, I have three lenses, a wide angle, mid-range, and my long lens is a 70 to 200. Not great for birds, but kind of good for what I shoot. Software I use is Lightroom and Photoshop. Although someone just recently said I need to try Capture One. So I don't know, Chris, if you're going to talk about that at all in your presentation, but that was one that a professional photographer said I have to try it, but who knows? I did recently, and 2 years ago now, publish a book. It's kind of a 13-year look at my photography called Moving Pictures. It's actually right here. So $85 if you're interested. Where you can find me. So I'm on Instagram, jcohen13. I have a website. I would suggest looking at my YouTube channel. It's JC Images Behind the Shot. And I take you along on photo shoots with me. Architectural, landscape, stuff in the studio. And quite often I show you how I process the images in Photoshop. And so it's kind of very helpful to look at, I think. There's a couple of photo critiques that I've done as well. I'll do more of those. But there's a lot of different things on there, hopefully something for everybody. So why architecture for me? To me, architecture is, man-made beauty, or at least it can be. Not always is. But man-made beauty is called art, right? And so I see architecture as art, or I try to. But it's art that has to have a functionality to it, right? Obviously, very important. It has to fit into the environment that it's in, hopefully. It is bound by the laws of physics, but within those laws, there's a ton of creativity that you find in some amazing architecture. And I just love the fact that everything you see is intentional, right? This is not Jackson Pollock creating art, splattering stuff all over a canvas. Every screw, every piece of material, wood, steel, tile is intentional. And I just love that. Structures that catch my eye. So you're exactly right. I'm walking around New York City or anywhere at this point, and I literally see the world through a camera lens. I was driving today on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. Corner of my eye, I see these amazing water towers in Queens that I made a mental note, I'm going back. So I love strong geometric features. I love geometry as a kid, and it still kind of captures my eye. I generally, aim towards modern buildings, but you'll see examples of very old buildings in the presentation. So I'm looking for interesting shapes, lines, angles, the way a building interacts with light, depending on the material, the time of day. And I look for kind of contrasting elements, right? Different materials, different tonalities within a building that create some contrast within my image. And then I tend to enhance that a little bit in Photoshop as well. But this is the stuff that I'm looking for. Doing the research. I guess when I'm walking around a city, I'm always doing research. And by the way, I live in Stamford, Connecticut. We have a downtown area. I've gone down there and taken pictures. It doesn't have to be New York or London or Japan or something, or Tokyo. I'm always online looking. If I'm going to a location, I'm on Google Maps. I'm going to social media. There's a bunch of, photo websites that I use. I do pay attention to architects. If I know that one of my favorite architects built a building in a particular town, I'll make sure I stop by if I'm there. And I'll show you an example of that actually. Certain apps like the photographer's ephemeris which is just an app that tells you the direction of the sun any time of day, any location in the world, is really helpful. I also will revisit the same location over and over again if it's an interesting location, because every time you go back, it's a little different. And then I'll show you examples where I just got lucky. I had no idea a building was where it was. I run into it, or I find it and come back the next day. So luck plays a role. But I will say, I find that if I don't go out with my camera, I never get lucky. Just never happens. So I got to be out there. I got to be out shooting. And that's when the luck happens. For me, the best conditions for shooting, either early or late, right? I don't want to be middle of the day where the sun's really high in the sky. I like the sun or the light coming in at an angle to whatever I'm shooting. I like it when the sky is kind of partly cloudy. And I'll show you examples of why that is. And if there's a little bit of wind, that's helpful. Because what I like to do is shoot long exposure photography. And so you get this cloud movement overhead over a building that adds to in my view, adds to the drama of the image. If I'm shooting in New York City, I usually go early Sunday morning, right? I can find a place to park. There's fewer people around, security chasing me away a little less often. And so that's a good time to go. So my goals, I'm really creating a fine art image, right? I want to highlight key aspects of a structure, accentuate the shapes, the light, the contrasting elements. I do that both the direction I'm shooting, my composition, and also in post-processing. I'll try to remove distractions, which is hard sometimes, but the goal here is to create art from art, right? I said that great architecture is art, and I want to create something that elevates that building or that structure. I don't want to just take a picture of a building where you say, oh, cool building. I'm going to take it and make it something more dramatic, but obviously highlighting the great features of whatever I'm shooting, building, structure. The challenges, kind of highlighted some of these, but avoiding distractions. Unfortunately, when you're around buildings, you are also around light posts, wires, street signs, people. And so you got to be patient sometimes or take them out in post if you can. You always want to get the right light, any photography, and that's always a challenge. When you're shooting with a wide angle lens, and often you have to capture the entire building, it can create distortions. Sometimes that's really distracting and you can fix some of that in post. Like, you'll get converging vertical lines as an example if you're pointing straight up. Sometimes you want that, by the way. Sometimes it actually adds to the drama. I mentioned security. I've been chased away from buildings. Typically, when you bring out a tripod, that's when they tend to get pissed off for some reason. And then parking in any city is a challenge. So you got to plan for that as well. So let me go through some examples. And all that stuff I talked about, I think you'll see in a lot of these examples. Some I'll spend a little bit more time on, some less. And by the way, if you have any questions on any of this stuff, you're not going to throw me off by asking it. You can just shout them out. You can wait till the end. It's fine. I didn't give you my background, by the way. I worked on Wall Street for 30 years, so I have a very thick skin. So even if you don't like an image, it wouldn't bother me that much. But don't tell me anyway. So let's start with this one, right? This is the Guggenheim, Upper East Side of New York. And you could see, right, the geometry, right? The circle, the rectangles, the curves, and you get the contrasting elements, the darks, the lights. This was a long exposure. You could see the kind of the cloud movement above. Now with this one, there are some buildings in the background, and I wanted to remove those distractions, have the viewer focus just on this building. So I did clean things up. The key here was doing this in the afternoon. So if you ever shoot the outside of this building, try to go in the afternoon because this facade faces west. So on a sunny day, it's a kind of a whitish building. The sun, hits this building wonderfully. So I guess this is not a modern building, but it's a maybe mid-century modern. This is the only museum, by the way, that Frank Lloyd Wright designed, which I was surprised to hear about. This is not a modern building. This is Lower Manhattan. You have very narrow streets, tall buildings, and so when you point up, you get this really cool convergence of shapes and contrasts. This was early in the morning. People do confuse this building with the Flatiron Building. It is not. This is on the corner of Beaver and Pearl Street. And again, I probably highlighted some of the highlights on the buildings. It was early, so the sky was relatively dark. And again, long exposure, you see some of that cloud movement above that building. I think this was featured in John Wick. If anybody is a Keanu Reeves fan, I didn't see the movie, but when I posted this, a bunch of people said, "Oh, that's the John Wick building." So there you go. This is the Flatiron Building. This is on 23rd Street in New York, and I was there right around sunrise, and so you can see the east side of the building is getting more light than the other. I did highlight this more or accentuate this more in post, and I did darken the sky, but I did get a very cool shot. It's very minimalistic, right? It doesn't show you the entire building, but if you know this building, this is all you need to see. And so again, I tried to add a little drama by not showing you everything. Similarly, this is just the top of the Chrysler Building, right? This is a very small part of the building, but if you know architecture, you know this is the Chrysler Building. I think I shot this from the top of 30 Rockefeller Center. You can go up there, called Top of the Rock, with a long lens. And this one, I definitely use a lot of work in post to kind of capture this. But again, pretty minimalistic, simple, but it highlights those key features at the top of this building, which is clearly the most, I think, important part of the building from an architectural standpoint. Talk about going back to the same location over and over. This is the Chrysler Building from, two different times, two different locations. First one I shot from Lexington Avenue. The second one on the right was from 42nd Street. And you could see on the one on the right, that's probably a 30-second exposure. So you got the cloud movement. But listen, I come into Grand Central all the time. This building is right across the street from Grand Central. So every time I'm there, I've got a shot to take a shot at it, which is pretty cool. And again, I got these two different images. I think I like the one on the left better. You capture more of that top of the building. I talked about getting lucky. So I was renting a house in White Plains, New York for 2 years while the house I'm in now is being built. And I was driving down a place called the Bronx River Parkway, and I look off to my right, and I saw this structure. This structure is a little chapel in the middle of a cemetery. I went back. I mean, who goes to the cemetery to do photography? But I went there, and I just love the shape of this building and those arches on the top, the arch of the doorway, the leading lines of those railings that go towards the building. And here I got really lucky because the cloud movement with the longer exposure was just fanning out over the building perfectly. So it's a nice contrast to the angles of those spines of the building, which I did highlight in post a bit more. Another kind of lucky one. This is, not many people know this building. It's in New York City. It's part of Columbia Medical School. So it's up on 168th Street. Most people are not up that way if you're just visiting New York. But I was avoiding traffic on the West Side Highway, and I was driving up, just some of the streets on the West Side, and I saw this, had my camera. I had to double park, had to rush out with my tripod. I did have a long exposure, but I was only able to take like 2 or 3 shots before I got chased away. But I got this one. Again, very unique building that not many people know about, and I just got lucky. Another one, I was driving in Connecticut during COVID, and corner of my eye, I catch this building. And this one, it's in color because I like the contrasting colors. Love the rust and the green and the blue sky. And those are, the rust and the green are complementary colors. they're exact opposites on a color wheel, which is what you want. So it's only a part of the building, and it's almost abstract in nature. Like you're not even sure it's a building, but it really captured my eye, and I really like shooting it. And again, just saw it out of the corner of my eye and pulled over, found it, and got this shot. Last lucky one. This was in Columbus, Ohio. This may have been the trip I did from New York to Nashville, where I drove through Pennsylvania. But my goal in Columbus was really shooting some of the grittier parts of town. But I was driving around, I saw this building. It's a museum. It's the National Veterans Memorial Museum. And again, the geometric features, the curvature, I really like those crisscrossing lines, contrasting elements. Very cool building. Just got lucky. So my son fortunately went to school in California near Los Angeles. So when I would visit him, I would bring my camera. And I went down to shoot another building this morning, but I saw this one. Sometimes when you get really cool reflections, when a building reflects on itself, again, it's almost abstract in nature. You know it's a building, but you stare at it too long and you wonder what it is. In this case, the sky was really boring, so I just let it get blown out. Typically I'd love some detail in the sky, but there wasn't much going on anyway. So I just overexposed the sky, so the building ends up being, I think properly exposed to some extent, but good contrast. So the reason I went to downtown Los Angeles was to shoot this building. This is the Disney Concert Hall. This is Frank Gehry, one of my favorite photographers. And I got there super early on a Sunday, I think. And luckily the sun was rising behind me. And I didn't have to do a lot in post on this, honestly. The way this building catches the light, is just fantastic. And I watch around for literally an hour, just taking close up, further back pictures. Very cool shot that did not need a lot of work in post, fortunately. But when I like an architect, I'm going to find other buildings that architect did. So this is Frank Gehry. This is Frank Gehry. This is in Las Vegas. So I went to Las Vegas not to gamble, but to photograph this building. It was actually a drive from Salt Lake City to Los Angeles. And I knew this building was there. It's part of a hospital complex, Cleveland Clinic, I believe. But again, it was like 107 degrees, but I just love the way the light was catching this. It almost looks fake, but it is a real building and very cool. And again, didn't have to do too much in post just because the way the light catches the building catches the light. Another Frank Gehry. So in New York, there's, I think, 3 Frank Gehry buildings. This is 8 Spruce Street. And you could have done this with your cell phone. It's just a cool building. I did darken the sky. It was not that dark, but I wanted the viewer really to focus on the building and the waves. And it's just a really cool structure. But I think by darkening the sky, adding contrast, it does elevate it a little bit. Another Frank Gehry building. This is the headquarters of IAC. It's on the west side of New York. And this is just a part of the building. I have pictures of the whole building, which is also very cool. But I just like, again, this more abstract nature of the building. Another Frank Gehry. Here's one more Frank Gehry. This is a theater up in the Hudson Valley on the campus of Bard College called the Fisher Center. And I went early one morning, very early actually. It's like a 2-hour drive from me. Probably left my house about 2:30 in the morning. It was in the summer. And again, super long exposure, had great cloud movement, not a lot of work in post, but again, big fan of the architect, so I stopped up there. Hopefully it's my last Frank Gehry. This is in New York City, the Hearst Tower. Not the best picture of this building, but I just wanted to show one more shot of this architect. So here's another architect that I admire, Eero Saarinen, did the TWA terminal at JFK Airport. the foreground was really messy with a lot of cars. So instead of trying to remove them all, I just kind of darkened it. I brightened up the building. I highlighted or accentuated the curvature of the roof. And by the way, if you go here, and I literally drove to the airport just to photograph this building. So I'm parked on top of a parking garage across the street from this building. And security does not like you up on top of a parking garage with a tripod. Uh, Fortunately, they didn't see me until after I got my shots. But I love this one. And by the way, you go inside the building, it's really cool. Walk around the back, it's cool. It's more than just this. It's really a very interesting building. So last week, let me take a step back. Last year, I had to go to a meeting. I'm on the board of a company, a public company, and I went to see one of the subsidiaries in a building in Holmdel, New Jersey. And I walked into the building and I was blown away how cool the building was. I find out the architect, Eero Saarinen, same architect that did this building. So just last week, I got access to the building. I went back and I got a lot more photos I'm not going to show you, but so this is the same architect. This is as you enter the building, very mid-century. It is enormous. So if you get down to Holmdel, New Jersey, probably not too far from you guys. This is called Bell Works. This used to be an old Bell Labs facility when AT&T was, a much bigger company. Very cool building. If any of you watch the show Severance, this is actually the building featured in the show Severance. Not all the white hallways you see, but when you see them in a lobby or on some stairs, this is the building. So just other shots where something caught my eye. And here it was, again, the geometric features, the curvature. This is a condo tower in New York on East 38th Street. Went down one morning, took a train to Grand Central, which is close by, and did a really long exposure to capture that cloud movement. And then in post, I definitely accentuated the curvature. Didn't have to do too much, but a little bit, and I came up with this shot. I like triangles too. So this is a building in New York called Via 57 on West 57th Street near the Hudson River. Very cool structure. You could photograph this from all different angles, and it's really interesting. And you'll notice a lot of what I do is I will darken the sky. And again, I think most of it's because I just want to see the building as the subject. And sometimes clouds or other things in the sky is going to, the eye is tend to drawn to the brightest part of a subject. And so I want that to be the building. This is another cool structure. I love the shapes. This is a place called the Little Island. This is a man-made island. It's about 2 acres, actually. There's 132 of those tulip-shaped pylons. And there's a little park on there. It's really cool. Great view of the city. It's on West 14th Street or just off of West 14th Street. And it gets really crowded on the weekends. It's in a very popular area. But if you're in New York and you're in that area, this is a really cool spot. This was about a 4-minute exposure. And I did it, one, to get the cloud movement, but two, I wanted to really smooth that water. Because any sort of ripples in the water would be, to me, distracting elements. So I got rid of those elements by just using a super long exposure, and you get a cleaner reflection as well in this case. So went from, triangles and curves to squares. This was a bit of a lucky one. My son lives in Brooklyn. This is in Williamsburg. And he furnished his apartment with all secondhand furniture, like Facebook Marketplace. And he bought a chair for someone in this building. He told me about the building. I went the next day and got this shot. There's 2 buildings next to each other. And a great view of Manhattan from here, too. Again, another kind of reflection one. This is in New York. This is me walking around, just finding interesting things to look at. Again, a little abstract in nature, but just the perfect reflection of the building on itself is really what attracted me, and the lines and the contrast. sometimes you stay local. This is in White Plains, New York, where I was living for 2 years. And so I went down on a very stormy night. It was about to pour, and the sky was really dramatic. I did use a long exposure here, but I got some really cool light hitting these two towers, and an interesting sky as well. So this is an intersection in New York, 53rd and Lexington, that you look all around, there's interesting buildings. That building on the left is the Citigroup Tower. It's got that slanted, top to it. It's a pretty well-known part of the New York skyline. But I just love these two buildings together in that post. I took a bunch of photos here. In fact, I was here during COVID, and it was so quiet in New York, I was able to stand in the middle of that intersection for like a good 30, 40 seconds. And, I had a red light, but still there was not a ton of traffic, which was great. This is the same intersection. So that building on the left is the Citigroup Tower, but just changing locations a bit, like literally walking across the street, pointing your camera a little bit differently, you get a pretty different image. This to this, same intersection, same buildings. And that's another good piece of advice is really study the scene, walk around, shoot buildings from different angles, wide angle, a tighter lens, longer lens. And it pays off usually. So I photographed buildings on the inside too. As you saw from the other one that I showed you, the Aero Sarandon building, the Bell Works building, this is the Guggenheim building. This is such a classic shot. I mean, I think every photographer that goes there does this because it's really cool. I think I might have been lying on my back even just to get as low as I could with this is probably 16 millimeter lens. And you get that nice upward motion and the narrowing of the circles, but again, very geometric in nature. Same building, I'm looking down. This one is definitely more processed. I cleaned this up quite a bit. Where you see the black, that's really where the artwork is. And so I just wanted to really show the essence of the internal structure of the building. So this one was definitely more heavily processed. This is New York City in Grand Central. There's a brand new area called Grand Central Madison, and it allowed folks from Long Island to come into Grand Central. And they built this underground without anybody seeing what was happening, really. And it's enormous. And this is this great escalator. I'm looking up. I got one little person on there. I could have cloned him out. But again, just being inside, looking around, sometimes you see some cool things. This is, again, internal architectural photography. This is in St. Petersburg. This is the Dali Museum in St. Pete. And I went there really to photograph this staircase. I knew it was there. I ended up going into the museum and seeing the artwork, and it's fantastic if you're there. But I did get this cool shot. I just love the thoughtfulness that this architect put into this staircase and how it continues up beyond the floor. So it was a pretty easy shot with a wide angle lens. This is in Naples, Italy. My wife and I were there. I had heard about this staircase. It's in a small office building. And I went to ask the security guy, and he could say in broken English, you can go look at it, but you can't climb up the stairs. So this is me lying on my back, looking straight up this staircase. But again, I love the curves and the contrasts. This is all marble staircase. Beautiful, beautiful building. I probably should have not listened to him and walked up and taken the shot going down, but I tend to not want to get arrested in Italy, so I figured I would listen to him. Again, in Cape Town, South Africa, a museum actually, a modern art museum in Cape Town. This used to be an old grain silo, and they had this really cool staircase in there. So I didn't even know it was there. I happened to get lucky on this one. This is New York City. This is the Rose Planetarium. It's part of the Natural History Museum. And this had to be cleaned up quite a bit. But again, I'm trying to focus on the essence of the structure. So I brightened up kind of that internal walkway that you see, the curve. And I darkened most other things. And I got rid of a bunch of people because it was pretty crowded there. Very cool staircase. This is at the Armani store in New York City. Not a lot of people know about this staircase. And this one, they did give me a hard time. I think I had to buy like a $400 t-shirt just to make sure I wasn't pissing off the salesperson. Um, Not even a great t-shirt, but I'm not sure it was worth the photo, but I still enjoyed it. So another kind of lesson I want to pass along is what you photograph doesn't have to be necessarily some amazing, beautifully designed building. This is a parking garage in my hometown, my town of Stamford. So it's a very utilitarian structure. But I drove by it and I thought, it's actually kind of interesting. And it hits on a lot of buttons that I like, right? The contrast, the different curves, the geometry. So I went back on a Sunday morning early and shot this, cleaned it up a little bit, but not too much. But as simple as a parking garage, a parking ramp to a garage can be artistic. Here's another one. This is in the Bronx. I'm not even sure what this structure is. I guess it's maybe a cement factory, but these cylinders look so cool to me, like they were rocket ships about to take off. So I stopped. This is a really gritty part of the Bronx, by the way. This is, not a fancy area at all. But something simple as this became, to me, something that was fairly artistic. I did a drive across the country. I basically drive my kids' cars everywhere. So my son had a car in Los Angeles, and I said, I'll drive it back to New York so you can have it for the summer. He was in school at the time. He flew back. So I drove his car back along Route 66. This is, again, somewhere in Missouri, but I just love the colors. It was a hazy day. And whoever designed this did not try to create something beautiful, right? They created something that was functional and just functional. That's it. But I thought it was kind of interesting. Now, you could have a debate. Like my wife doesn't like this photo. I have other friends that love this photo. I like it, so I put it on here. But again, keep your eyes open. Even boring stuff can be interesting. This is in New York City. This is actually a salt shed. So very, very utilitarian building, but at least they designed it in such a way, especially with the lights on, where it's interesting. I often try to look for something in the foreground, if there is something. This is, again, my town of Stamford, looking up through this interesting architectural, it doesn't really do anything. It's just there for really artistic purposes. But having something in the foreground can add interest to a photo. Here's another example. This is on East 57th Street in New York City. But looking up through the circle adds a little bit of drama to this. This was a building right by my office in New York. This is right by Bryant Park. Really cool building. I think it's a Bank of China building now. But I like the geometry of it, and I love this big disc in front. Hard to get because it was much darker in the foreground, and I probably could have shot it a little differently to lighten it up a little bit. But again, having something in the foreground can be of interest. I try to, get out and shoot stuff just, when I'm driving around, I see something. So I happen to see this Dairy Queen. I went back on a rainy evening because I figured it would add to the mood. Got a tripod out, did a long exposure, waited for some cars to go by. And it's just a classic Dairy Queen, probably dating back to the 1950s or 60s, I'm guessing. I'm not sure. Another one, a great old theater in Riverside, California. Again, using long exposure, whether it's to capture cloud movement or car movement, is always kind of fun. Here's another one. I was actually speaking at a conference in Chicago, and I had to, I brought my camera. I had some downtime in the evening that went down. This is kind of a classic Chicago shot, but luckily a big bus went by or a truck, so I got lines all over the place, again, adding to the image a bit. Stamford, Connecticut. This is a great old theater from 1929, and they show art movies. It's really cool, and it's been refurbished. But I love, this was the same night I shot the Dairy Queen, by the way. Waited for a nice rainy evening, got the cool reflections. There was unfortunately a really annoying truck parked in front that I was able to spend like 2 hours cloning out in post. But anyway, all right, let me talk about processing the images. I kind of talked about what I try to achieve. I guess I can give you some sense of how I achieve it. First of all, I try to do what I can in Lightroom, right? I'm going to convert to black and white. I'll bring up shadows, contrast, clarity, any straightening I'll do in Lightroom. And sometimes I leave it at that, right? There are some images where that's enough. I'm done. Uh, Often, though, I'll go into Photoshop, and that's where I can get pretty precise, and I'll make a lot of selections, different parts of the building typically, and then you can play with them. So I can increase contrast from one part of the building to another by making those selections. I use mostly just curve adjustment layers and exposure adjustment layers. And then I use quite a bit of gradients as well, to really shape what I'm seeing in the image. And then I will obviously clone stuff out if it's distracting. And that process has gotten easier now with the remove tool in Photoshop. And again, the goal is to create drama, highlight key features of a building. Sometimes I can highlight the directionality of light, or if there was no light, let's say it's a gray day, in post-processing, I can say, gee, what if light was coming over my left shoulder? What would it look like? And you start, playing with parts of the building that would normally get hit by light. And then I can smooth out some surfaces as well. Some of these you'll see is a really dramatic change, others less so. Here's one that's pretty dramatic. So this is a building on the campus of San Diego, University of San Diego, University of California at San Diego, UCSD. This is the Giesel Library. Theodore Giesel. Anyone know who that is? Dr. Seuss. So Theodore Giesel and his wife donated the money for this library, and I loved the building, the shape, but it was really kind of messy. The concrete was very messy, and so you can see in post, I smoothed things out quite a bit. Did not love the distracting background, so I basically got rid of it all. So this is a highly processed image. Arguably overdone, but I wanted the eye really to focus just on this building and the structure and not be distracted by dirty concrete, buildings in the back, trees. There were no people to get rid of, but anyway. Here's a little less dramatic, right? This is a pretty cool shot anyway. This is a building in Tokyo. I was there on business, took my camera and got this shot. And I like this shot, even on the right. It's a pretty cool shot, but I certainly didn't like that building on the upper left that you see on the right shot. So I darkened the whole sky and got rid of that. I also wanted to accentuate the curvature of the facade of the tower. It's obviously a curved building. And in post, using gradients, I was able to kind of accentuate that and overall added contrast and added more drama to it. And these are the selections I made, by the way. So when I went in there, I mostly used the polygonal lasso tool because these are straight lines. It's pretty easy. But I made these selections, and with each of them, I did something different. I used gradients, I darkened them, I lightened them, and it was able to create that image. Oh, here's my favorite intersection. Very similar to the shot I showed you before. In this one, I included the subway station. I thought it was cool. Um, and so you can see the before and after. The before is actually pretty cool. But I wanted to create drama, contrast. Obviously did black and white except for the subway letters. And here were the selections I made. So not too many, but definitely, kept me busy. Often what happens, depending on the image, making these selections can take longer than, changing the tonality, because I have to get very precise in some cases. Again, these weren't too tough because these lines are pretty straight, but there are other buildings where there's curves and ins and outs that I have to be pretty careful with. This is a building in Bridgeport, Connecticut that I had passed a gazillion times. It's right off of Route 95. And one day I said, let's go back and photograph it. And you could see it wasn't heavily edited, but I added contrast. You can see those pillars, right? I accentuated the curvature of those. The inner curve I accentuated, darkened the sky a bit, but didn't have to do too much. I also, I like the colors, so I made sure those colors were pretty bright. And these were the selections I made for this one. So here's an example. I probably should have done a live example, but I thought it would take too long. So here's a sped up example of a building in New York City that I photographed. This is the before. I'm going to hit enter. I think there's music. I don't think you're going to hear the music, so I'll just let it play. Did you hear the music or no?
No.
Oh, you never do. I don't know why. It's good music too, but anyway, you could see the before and after, right? It was cool before, but by making those changes that you saw, and that played for exactly 19 seconds, it probably took me maybe an hour to do. So not overly taxing, but you got to get in pretty precise. Um, that ends my commentary. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. Go back any other images that you'd want to see. What else can I talk to you about?
Uh, Jay, if I can ask a question on that image you have on the screen, the one you had the video on, could you have accomplished the same thing in Lightroom as you did in Photoshop?
You know, it would have been maybe not quite as good. The problem is in Lightroom, it's harder to make such precise selections. It's gotten a lot better, by the way. I could have made those selections with a brush, and with the brush tool in Lightroom, use a masking technique and it finds the edge for you. So I could have tried to, but the selection process in Photoshop is just far more powerful that I could make those selections very precisely and not worry about bleeding into, other parts of the building or bleeding into the sky.
Thank you.
Jay, if I may ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
I have on occasion, I did several years ago, did some pictures of buildings, not as well as you've done, but tried. But one of the problems I had was the windows. In many of the pictures, the windows were not the same color or light. Did you do anything to say make all of your windows gray?
I don't
Or
think I, yeah, I don't
hmm?
think I did. It's a good question, and that comes up with me sometimes as well. There are times where I will clean things up. Like I can even see in this image, that big facade on the right that kind of half curved facade, you get different windows with different, because the light's hitting it differently. And that doesn't bother me too much. There are times where I do clean things up, especially when you look inside and there's a light in a window that's kind of distracting. Um, so sometimes that does happen. But if I go back and, look at some of these other, some of these, it's just I think I just got lucky here. This one, I don't think I did much. You can see on the left side, there are some lights in the building, but in this case, I didn't have to do too much. And it was really just the way the light was hitting it at the time. If I shot it at a different hour, it may not have worked so well. Here, the windows are all similar, but here you do have windows. Some have shades, some don't. It didn't bother me too much. Here, just because of the angle, I didn't have to worry about it. So it really depends on the angle you're shooting at. But there are times where I do clean things up.
Thank you.
Jay, I have another question for you. You use quite a few long exposures to get your streaky skies. How do you judge your exposure for something like that, whether it be 10 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute?
Yeah, very good question. So first of all, when I'm doing this, I should have let people know this. I'm in most cases, I'm using a neutral density filter. So I've got a filter on my camera that darkens the scene quite a bit. In this case, it was probably a 10-stop filter, which is a really dark filter. So what I do is I focus beforehand, set the composition, I lock in my focus, I put the filter on, then it's a matter of, okay, how long an exposure do you need? So there's two ways to do it. One is trial and error. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I have a sense of what it should be, but I get it wrong all the time. The second thing is you can use an app. So the filters I use are from Lee, the company called Lee. But you can use it, and it doesn't matter the manufacturer. They have an app that basically says if you have a properly exposed image and your shutter speed is, let's say, 1/100th of a second, if you put a 10-stop filter on it, you should use 20 seconds. And I can use that. That requires me getting my cell phone out and actually doing it. So sometimes I'm lazy and I just do trial and error. But there are apps that can really help you quite a bit for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll offer a question, Jay. There are some traditional architectural photographers who insist that keystoning must be corrected. You're obviously not one of those.
Now, I think with interior architecture, like if I go back to this one, I'm going to try to make sure all those lines are vertical. I think, and I'm actually doing some photography now for an interior designer. So for her website and competition she's entering. So I go into a house and shoot, the design work she's done. In that case, I'm definitely trying to keep things as vertical as possible. But external, it doesn't bother me too much. I mean, this is what you see with your eye, really. I don't have a tilt shift lens. So a tilt shift lens allows you basically to keep things a bit more vertical, even when you're pointing the camera up. I don't have one. I've never used one. I should, by the way, I should learn how to use one because there are times where you would want that. But yeah, it doesn't bother me so much. I think again, depending on the image, there are times where I will straighten things out. But, for something like when I'm shooting straight up, this one's relatively good, but there's not much you can do about it, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Jay,
Okay,
this
member-
is Dave Marchetto. Just a wonderful presentation. I have a staircase recommendation for you. I had to step away, so maybe you already, presented it. But have you been to Atlanta, the Marriott Marquis there, and checked out that staircase? There's only one word for it, and it's spectacular.
I have not been there, but I will be probably going there in the relatively near future. So I'm writing that down. That is great.
Yeah, it's in Peachtree Center, and you can spend all day photographing the staircase.
That's very cool. Thank you for that, David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you could Google it for sure.
Yeah,
And I've never seen anything like it.
that's so cool. I'll definitely check that out.
Jay, would you talk briefly about your technique for converting to black and white?
Yeah, I usually I like using Lightroom for that. Because when you convert to black and white in Lightroom, you can go down and then change, depending on the color, kind of change the tone of various colors. You can do that in Photoshop as well. Lightroom's, I think, better for that. You get more colors to choose from in Lightroom than you do in Photoshop. I'm not sure why that is, but it is. And so I tend to do that in Lightroom. So what I would do is convert to black and white just by hitting the black and white button. But then, I know like these skies are blue. I can pull down the blues, darken the skies, make those clouds pop more. If a building has has a red in it, and I want to brighten it up, I can do that in Lightroom. So relatively straightforward. I don't getting into too much technical detail. I make it black and white, and I kind of play with the colors depending on what I'm trying to achieve.
Okay. And with your darkening to hide or eliminate the distractions, do you typically remove objects like other buildings and people and stuff in the background before you darken?
A little bit of both. If it's easy to remove, I'll remove it. Definitely. There are some where, like for example, I think it was the library in California. Sorry to walk you through all this. This one, I didn't bother removing all that stuff. I basically selected the structure, right? And then I inverted that selection. So now I have everything but the structure. And I used a solid color adjustment layer and made it all gray. And then I added that gradient in the middle of the background just to add a little bit of interest. So again, this one, again, I was very aggressive on this one. Where others, this one, I probably removed that before because it's easy. It's a simple thing to remove. Where trees are definitely tougher.
Yeah. Would you go back to the building with where you emphasize the uh, roundness of the column? Yeah, that's an amazing technique. And would you describe for everybody how you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you do is, so here was the selection in green, right? So I made that selection. Now, so then just focus just on that part of the building. I would have use the curves adjustment layer pulled up. So I'm brightening the entire selection. I reselect it. Then I use a reflective gradient tool and I pull across. So I just want the middle to be brighter. The outside gets darker. Then, by the way, I can do it again. I can darken the outside of that selection, and you end up. It's a pretty cool thing. You end up, really accentuating the curvature. And by the way, on my YouTube channel, you'll see various examples of me doing this.
Excuse me,
That
Jay. Excuse me, Jay. What you've just described, can you also do with gradients in Lightroom?
you really don't have the same level of control. And the problem is I'm working just on that selection. There are examples where, yes, I just do it in Lightroom. It's not, if it's a simple structure, I can, use a brush, a very soft brush, and pull down the middle so the outside sort of gets dark, but it's definitely easier in Photoshop. It's much more precise.
Yeah. Would you show the before and after again? And
Yeah. So
what I'd like people to look at would be compare the building, the two buildings, and how it really is effective in emphasizing the curvature on the left.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the only curved one I have where, I mean, this one a little bit, but not as much. But if you looked at the, let me go back to, same thing with this one. Let me make it bigger. Same technique. I don't have the before, but you would have noticed the curve. Definitely, it's a big round feature, but I definitely accentuated it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's cool.
This one too, same thing, by the way. I would have kind of selected the building, used a reflective gradient tool to make the middle of it brighter, that center building. Not here though, but anyway. Good question.
Okay, how about other folks? Anyone else have a question? Okay. Joe, what do you think?
I think, Jay, this was absolutely, it was very enlightening to me with what you could do in Photoshop to make those curvatures. And I've tried that in Lightroom and they never, ever come out the way I want. So now I got to learn this new thing about what did you call it? It was
The reflective gradient tool. So it's the gradient tool. Within the gradient tool, you've got like linear gradient, reflective gradient, I think circular gradient. The reflective one is the one to use. And again, I probably have this image, maybe even on my YouTube channel. I think I may have vlogged this. So you can see me doing the shooting and in many cases the post-processing. And I have it on my YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist of just architecture. Those tend to be my most popular, and just check it out. So JC Images Behind the Shot.
I can vouch for that because I was on your website and those particular examples where you went and took the shot and then you looked at it and said, you took that really? And then you massaged it, you worked it, you put your artistic talent to it, and you came up with some of these fantastic images. And to me, that was extremely instructive.
Oh,
for me to
fantastic.
learn how to make art out of a rather mundane kind of a photograph. I'm not saying your photography is mundane, but you made it into art. And I encourage everybody to go to your website and that will be on the notes for tomorrow too, for the linkages to that.
Yeah, so on my website, there's a link to my YouTube channel, also a link to Instagram if you want to see it. But yeah, fun stuff. I love everything about it. And so I having a chance to speak with all you about photography is a great way for me to spend my evening. So I appreciate the invite.
Well, we thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your secrets and your artwork. We found it very fascinating.
Yeah,
And
thank you very much. This is extremely inspiring.
Great, George. Thank you so much for that.
It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll stop sharing. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much.
evening.
thank you.
Thanks.
Enjoy the mud sail as well. Sounds like
Thank you.
fascinating.
We'll send you an invite if you want to join us.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, we'll send that off to you tonight.
Thank
So,
you, guys.
Thank
okay,
you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you
night.
very much.
Presentation. Bye-bye.
See you, Jay.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, guys, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll hope to see you at the upcoming trips. And of course, the meeting in 2 weeks, March the 17th. Thank you and good night.
Okay,
Night.
take care.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.